Hello.
Hare Krishna. Today, Saturday? Yeah. All right. Hare Krishna. Good morning, dear devotees. Buenos días y dobre otro. Having all sorts of computer issues here. All right, here we go. Krishna consciousness. Oh, hey. Abdullah's here. Y'all remember Abdullah?
Haribol.
Tuning in live from Saudi Arabia.
KSA. You weren't lying about the cows. They actually showed up.
I told you he wanted to see some cows. So I said you have to come to Bhagavatam class and you can see a few.
Enjoy.
So Abdullah, oh, you've been to Bhagavatam classes at the Manor and at the Bhakti Center. So we sing Jai Radha Madhava first, but mostly everyone just stays muted. You can sing along on your own if you like.
Enjoy.
And then I'll read the verse and say some stuff.
Awesome.
Jai Radha Madhava Jaya Kunja Hari Jaya Radha Madhava Jaya Kunja Hari Gopi Jannavala Jaya Girivardhari Jaya Girivardhari Gopi Jannavala Jaya Girivardhari Jaya Jaya Girivardhari Shodanandana Jaya Raja Janaranjana Jaya Yashodanandana Jaya Jaya Raja Janaranjana Jamunatira Vanachari Jaya Punjabihari Jaya Punjabihari Jamunatira Vanachari Jaya Punjabihari Jaya Jaya Punjabihari Jai Radha Madhava Jaya Kunjari Jaya Jaya Madhava Jaya Kunjabihari Gopi Dandavala Jaya Girivardhari Jaya Girivardhari Gopi Jannavardhani Jaya Girivardhari Jaya Girivardhari Jaya Yashodanandana Jaya Raja Janaranjana Jaya Yashodanandana Jaya Raja Janaranjana Jamuna Tiravanachari Jaya Kunja Vihari Jaya Kunja Vihari Jamuna Tiravanachari Jaya Kunja Vihari Jaya Kunja Vihari Jai Radha Madhava Jaya Kunja Vihari Jaya Radha Madhava Jaya Kunja Vihari Shri Shri Radha Madhava Ki Jai Shri Shri Radha Madhava Ki Jai Jai Om Vishnu Pada Paramhamsa Parivajakacharya Stottara Sata Shri Srimad Divine Grace Relay Sri Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada Ki Jai Jai Om Vishnu Pada Paramhamsa Parivajakacharya Astottara Sata Shri Srimad Divine Grace Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati Thakur Goswami Maharaj Prabhupada Ki Jai Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Jai Nitai Gaura Premanandi Haribo. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So, today we're reading from the Srimad Bhagavatam. Lucky us. This is Canto 5, Chapter 2, the activities of Maharaj Agnidra. For those of you tuning in, Maharaj Agnidra is the son of Priyavrata, whom we read about in the last few chapters. And he also desired to have a son. He practiced some austerity to become qualified. And then Lord Brahma sent a beautiful celestial girl named Purvachiti to the place where Agnidra was doing his tapasya, his austerity. And she attracted him. We're reading about that part now, which is relevant to our Krishna consciousness, as we will soon find out. So in chapter 2, text number 6, the Sanskrit is all prose, so we're not all going to sing it. I'm just going to try my best to make it sound sweet. Tam eva vidure madhukarim eva samanasya upajigrantim divija manuja manonaya nahlada dhughair kati vihara vrida vinaya valoka susvarak saravavayar Manasi nrinam kusumayudyasya viratatim vivaram nijamuka vigalitam ritasava sahasa bhashanamoda madhanda madhukara nikaro paradhena. What a long word. Drutapada vinyasena valgu spandana stana kalasha kabara bhararasanam devim tad avalokanena vivritasvarasya bhagavato makaradvajasya vasham upanito jadavad iti hovacha. Wow, word for word translation says, Tam to her, Eva, indeed, avidure nearby, Madhu Karim Eva, like a honeybee. There's a lot of sweet words here, in case you're wanting to improve the sweetness of your Sanskrit vocabulary. You should write down all these words. Sumanasaha, beautiful flowers. Upajikrantim, smelling. Divija, of those born in the heavenly planets. Manuja, of those born in human society. Manaha, the mind. Nayana, for the eyes. Ahlada, pleasure. Dugahai, producing. Gati, by her movement. Vihara, by pastimes. Vrida, by shyness. Vinaya, by humility. Avaloka, by glancing. Susvara Akshara, by her sweet voice. Avayavahai, and by the limbs of the body. Manasi, in the mind. Nrinam, of men. Kusuma Ayudasya, of Cupid, who has a flower arrow in his hand. Vidadatim, making. Vivaram, oral reception. Nijamukha, from her own mouth. Vigalita, pouring out. Amrita Asava, nectar like honey. Sahasa, in her smiling. Bhashana, and talking. Amoda, by the pleasure. Mada Andaha, blinded by intoxication. Oh, I'm getting overwhelmed just by reading these verses, just by reading these words. It's a lot of intimate power going on here. Madhukara, of bees. Nikara, by groups. Uparodhena, because of being surrounded. Druta, hasty. Pada, of feet. Vinyasena, by stylish stepping. Take note. You're not just supposed to look good. You got to be able to walk good to really meet the standard of these heavenly damsels. Stylish stepping. That's the high standard. Balgu, a little. Spandana, moving. Stana, breasts. Kalasha, like water pots. Kabara, of her braids of hair. Bhara, weight. Rashanam, the belt upon the hips. Devim, the goddess. Tat avalokanena, simply by seeing her. Vivrita avarasya, avasarasya, taking the opportunity of Bhagavataha, the greatly powerful. Makara dvajasya, of Cupid. Vasham, under the control. Upanitaha, being brought in. Jadavat, as if stunned. Iti, thus, ha, certainly. Uvacha, he said. All right, here's the translation and the purport by His Divine Grace, Srila A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, Srila Prabhupada ki jai. So again, we're hearing about how Maharaj Agnidra, the son of Priyavata, desired to have a son, and Lord Brahma, knowing his mind, sent this beautiful damsel from the celestial planets, from the heavenly planets, to come down and satisfy him. But this is relevant to our Krishna consciousness. So it says, like a honeybee, the Apsara, that's the heavenly damsel, the Apsara smelled the beautiful and attractive flowers. She could attract the minds and vision of both humans and demigods by her playful movements, her shyness and humility, her glances, the very pleasing sounds that poured from her mouth as she spoke, and the motion of her limbs. By all these qualities, she opened for Cupid, who bears an arrow of flowers, a path of oral reception into the minds of men. When she spoke, nectar seemed to pour from her mouth. As she breathed, the bees, mad for the taste of her breath, tried to hover about her beautiful lotus-like eyes. Disturbed by the bees, she tried to move hastily, but as she raised her feet to walk quickly, her hair, the belt on her hips, and her breasts, which were like water jugs, also moved in a way that made her extremely beautiful and attractive. Indeed, she seemed to be making a path for the entrance of Cupid, who was most powerful. Therefore, the prince, completely subdued by seeing her, spoke to her as follows. So in the next verse, we'll hear about what he says, but for now, we have some commentary from Srila Prabhupada. The purport, Prabhupada says, how a beautiful woman's movements and gestures, her hair, and the structure of her breast, hips, and other bodily features attract the minds not only of men, but of demigods also, is very finely described in this statement. The words Divija and Manuja specifically emphasize that the attraction of feminine gestures is powerful everywhere within this material world, both on this planet and in the higher planetary systems. It is said that the standard of living in the higher planetary systems is thousands and thousands of times higher than the standard of living on this planet. Therefore, the beautiful bodily features of the women there are also thousands and thousands of times more attractive than the features of the women on earth. The men too, but I would imagine that in the heavenly planets, as here, men just aren't, but always pale in comparison to the attractive quality of the fair sex. The Creator has constructed women in such a way that their beautiful voices and movements and the beautiful features of their hips, their breasts, and the other parts of their bodies attract the members of the opposite sex, both on earth and on other planets, and awaken their lusty desires. When one is controlled by Cupid, or the beauty of women, he becomes stunned like matter, such as stone. I want to ask everybody to share some stories of when you've been stunned like a stone. Captivated by the material movements of women, he wants to remain in this material world. This is the real kicker. Captivated by the material movements of women, he wants to remain in this material world. Thus, one's promotion to the spiritual world is checked simply by seeing the beautiful bodily structure and movements of women. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu has therefore warned all devotees to beware of the attraction of beautiful women and materialistic civilization. It's interesting that Prabhupada is putting them into the same category, beautiful women and materialistic civilization. Let's try to discuss why that is. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu even refused to see Prataparudra Maharaj because he was a very opulent person in the material world. Lord Chaitanya said in this connection, Nishkinchananasya Bhagavad Bhajano Mukasya. Those who are engaged in the devotional service of the Lord, because they are very serious about going back home, back to Godhead, should be very careful to avoid seeing the beautiful gestures of women and should also avoid seeing persons who are very rich. I think some people in the class will need to sign off then. No, I'm just kidding, dear devotees. This applies to materialistic people who are not advanced in Krishna consciousness, as we will discuss. So here's the full verse. The Kinchananasya Bhagavad Bhajanon Mukasya Param Param Jigamishur Bhavasagarasya Sandarshanam Vishainam Atayoshitam Cha Ha Hanta Hanta Vishabhakshanato Pyasadu. Alas, for a person who is seriously desiring to cross the material ocean and engage in the transcendental loving service of the Lord without material motives, seeing a materialist engaged in sense gratification or seeing a woman who is similarly interested is more abominable than drinking poison willingly. Hare Krishna. One who is serious about going back home, back to Godhead, should not contemplate the attractive features of women and the opulence of rich men. Let me just rewind and say that again. One who is serious about going back home, back to Godhead, should not contemplate the attractive features of women and the opulence of rich men. Such contemplation will check one's advancement in spiritual life. Once a devotee is fixed in Krishna consciousness, however, these attractions will not agitate his mind. I know I'm like repeating so many parts, but I just have to say that again because it's very encouraging. Once a devotee is fixed in Krishna consciousness, however, these attractions will not agitate his mind. Om Jnana Timirandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Karavayam Dadati Svapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Parakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunathan Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakan Vitamscha He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Brindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sutta Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vanchakalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Eva Cha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasari Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Hare Krishna. So this story is very instructive for a lot of us, especially for guys like me who are lusty dogs in recovery. Many of us are here because we are trying to recover from the intoxicating lustfulness of the material energy. We should know that it is inbuilt and it is very powerful. And it can be a huge obstacle in our Krishna consciousness. For the young men, it's pretty obvious. For the older men, they remember. The young ladies, they might be thinking, what's the big deal? Of course, nowadays, young women are also just as wild as unhinged men in many cases. But it's not as much of a design flaw in the female body as it is in the male body. We're designed with this flaw, a sort of biological, psychological urge to chase after the opposite sex and to become completely bewildered by it. What did Prabhupada say here? When one is controlled by Cupid or the beauty of women, he becomes stunned like matter such as stone. I won't share any personal experiences of when I was stunned like stone and had the intelligence of a stone in the presence of beautiful women, but the problem is self-evident for many of us. The question is, though, what to do about it, and how can one progress in Krishna consciousness, especially when constantly challenged by this. For those of us who still have a bit of youth in our bodies, we might feel like we're just constantly challenged by this. At every moment, there is desire. At every moment, there is agitation caused by either the opposite sex or materialistic civilization. Prabhupada lumped the two together, and it's very important for us to understand that materialistic civilization is more or less based on sex. That's like 90% of the purpose. Krishna points this out when he's summarizing the demoniac mentality, the asura mentality, the way that the demoniac people think, the very materialistic people think. He says that asatyama pratishtamte jagarahuranishvaram aparaspara sambhutam kim anyat kama haitukam. That for the materialistic persons, there is no motivation except for kama, lust. He says this is how the the demoniac type people think the only reason to do anything is for kama, for selfish satisfaction of the body and its senses. There's some famous philosophers who fleshed this idea out and made a lot of money off of it, like what's her name? Surprisingly, Ayn Rand. That was her whole thing. That nobody does anything except for some selfish motivation. It's the only reason. There is only sex. Everything else is just like a dressing, a sort of decoration. Of course, there are some materialistic scientists who tried to make this a bit more set in stone, particularly the theory of evolution suggests that the only motivation to do anything is to just sort of duplicate your genetic material through sex. And in that way, you approach immortality. As long as your genes live on, that's as close as you'll come to transcending death. And so there's nothing else except for sexual attraction. And they go through these wild justifications as to why anybody should do anything. There's a whole field of like a subcategory of evolution science called the psychology of evolution. Kalaswarupa, you probably know how people try to justify and explain all sorts of psychological activities. Evolutionary psychology, sure. They try to explain any sort of psychological activity with reference to the theory of evolution. And the only reason you have a feeling of affection for your mother is because of sex. The only reason that you work hard at your job is because of sex. It's just the wildest category. I mean, you can read about it if you like. It's just such a stretch. Anyway, the point is that for the materialistic person, the whole idea of progress, the whole idea of accomplishing anything in this world is very much entwined with sexual desire. For men, this is a bit more self-evident. It's a bit more obvious. I got to get the money. I got to get the house. I got to get some stuff so that I can. And in this way, what did Prabhupada say here? We just become bewildered. Our promotion to the spiritual world is checked. Our promotion to the spiritual world is checked because the spiritual world is not a place for sexual activity. It's not a place for mundane gratification of our organs. Although clasping organs is a phenomenon and a fascinating one in this material world, there is no such thing in the spiritual world. There's only attraction for Krishna. The attraction for Krishna is the sum and substance of the spiritual dimension, that everyone seeks to please Krishna. And although there are relationships in the spiritual world, particularly in Vaikuntha, there are, couples, but they're not attracted to each other sexually. They're only attracted to Krishna, to serving the Lord, pleasing him. That is the loving exchange between liberated, fully spiritually conscious living entities. The exchange of love is mutual support and service to the Lord. Now, for so many of us, we need to learn that now. We need to practice and learn that now. We need to get over the whole sex thing, the lust monster. And there are many stances to take in fighting the lust monster. Like if you're wrestling, you can take an offensive stance or a defensive stance. So we have our various ashrams for different stances in fighting against the lust monster. In 3 of the ashrams, you just do without entirely. All of the ashrams exist in relation to sex. For the brahmachari, the vanaprastha, and the sannyasa, you just do without. Not going to have any of that. And in the grihastha ashram, there is sex, but in a regulated, controlled way, so that it is not so much of an impediment. In fact, it could even be a service to the Lord. Krishna says, Kama viruddha bhuteshu. Now, what is he saying? Dharma viruddha bhuteshu. Kamasmi bharatarshava. that when that sexual activity is performed according to Dharma, he says, asmi, that is me. That's devotional service. So it's nice devotional service. Of course, it's also followed by several decades of raising children, which is awesome, by the way. Loving it. So let's try to understand. For the majority of materialistic people, the motivation for progress is the sexual desire. Men know that if there weren't the opposite sex, they would not work so hard. In fact, that was one of the interesting things we read about in the last chapter about Maharaj Priyavrata, who, despite being a perfect brahmachari, he was very renounced, he was very fixed in spiritual consciousness. When he was asked to be the emperor of the world, he got married. And Prabhupada commented in one of those purports that generally a man needs the motivation of a woman to do something in this world, to be progressive, both materially and spiritually. Otherwise, men can just have like 2 pairs of pants and 3 shirts, like for the rest of the life, and that's it. They'll just kind of sit in one place and throw rocks. There's just not a whole lot of motivation without the fair sex. So the Grihastha ashram is all about harnessing that powerful energy to make it an impetus for spiritual progress. And that's why it's very important ashram, and that's why most of us should be in that status of life. I want to say something really important about women, if I may, which is still the most interesting subject in the whole world, besides Krishna, of course, is that herein there's a lot of description about beautiful women and how it disturbs the mind of a man. And we should know that this lust, this powerful desire, it's especially felt in the presence of women. Most men, they experience that. And Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, chapter 3, text number 40. Let me see if I can remember it. Chapter 3 is a great chapter all about lust. And not all about, but a large part of it is about lusty desire and how it bewilders us. And he says, Indriyani manobhudir asyadishtanam uchate, that this lust, this kama, this selfish desire, which especially manifests as sexual desire, he says, Indriyani manobhudir adishtanam, it's seated, its position, its refuge is in the senses, it's in the mind and in the intelligence. Indriyani manobhudir asyadishtanam uchate. Etayar vimohayatyesha jnanam avrityam dehinam. It's from here that lust completely bewilders the living entity, the embodied soul, and covers their intelligence. Jnanam avrityam. Indriyani manobhudir, he says the lust, it's in the senses, the mind, and the intelligence. Hold on a second. There must be some sort of mistake. There must be some sort of typo here, because as we all know, it's actually the young woman's fault that there is lusty attraction, right? So Krishna must be making a mistake. There must be some editing of the text here, because we all know that it's actually the woman's fault that men become lusty and do stupid things, and that therefore she should be punished by being forced to dress in a particular way or being restricted to a particular type of service. And being sarcastic, of course. That's the whole point, is that Krishna is saying in this verse that the lust, it's in the senses, it's in the mind, it's in the intelligence. It's not actually the woman's body. It's not her fault. My dear Prabhus, my dear men. Selfish desire, it manifests in our senses. We must learn to control our senses. It doesn't work to control the women. I'm sorry. if I'm being a little controversial here and getting into some kind of social political themes, because a lot of people have different opinions about how to deal with this problem of sexual attraction. And for some people, the solution is that you should control the women, punish them for the lusty desires of men. And I'm just saying, from what I'm getting from this verse, chapter 3, text 40, it doesn't really seem to support Krishna's position here, where he's saying that the senses, the mind, and the intelligence are the sitting places of this lust, not actually the young woman's body. I don't know. Someone help me out if maybe I'm missing the verse where he says that actually it's all women's fault. It's actually in our senses. That's where the lust is situated. In our eyes, our ears, our nose, our tongue, our tactile sense. They're always itching to connect with some sense object. And there is no better sense object for all of the senses than the opposite sex. It kind of's got the whole package. So you have to recognize that the problem is in me. Now, we can make some arrangements to learn how to control our senses. Like the brahmachari should just be isolated from women. There's no doubt about it. Out of sight, out of mind. I've had personal experience, believe it or not, that for like 5 years when I was in one of the best brahmachari ashrams in New Zealand, for like 5 years, I didn't even think of a woman. Just because I never saw them, never talked to them, just never had anything to do with them. And it wasn't even a problem. So for many, that's a good way to learn how to control the senses. That's not the end game, but that is a means towards the end. That if young men especially can step back, give a respectful distance to the opposite sex, and that way they can focus on controlling their mind and senses so that they won't be bewildered like a stone and become like a stone. That's one way. Take a step back from that powerful energy and learn to control your mind and senses. That's really the principle of the brahmacharya ashram. But ultimately, the lust is a perversion of the love that we naturally feel in connection with the Lord. And this is very important. This is also what Krishna is saying in this 3rd chapter, right? What is it? Text number 30. Let's see if I can find it real quick. No, it's not text number 30. He says on 37. No, not 37. Yeah. It's this lust that we're feeling, this sexual energy, this attraction towards the opposite sex. It's ultimately just the natural loving propensity of the soul, but in contact with matter. When our love becomes mixed with matter, it gets weird. Krishna says, Kama esha, Krodha esha, Rajaguna samudbhava, Mahashana mahapapma, Vidinam mihadde, Vairinam. Vairina means it's the greatest enemy for the conditioned soul, is this Kama. Rajaguna samudbhava, in contact with them, mixed with the mode of passion, with this material quality of passion, our natural propensity to love the Lord selflessly turns into selfish lust, like milk becomes spoiled, or milk transforms into yogurt, which is not spoiled. I mean, it is a kind of spoiling. It's a controlled spoiling, turning milk into yogurt. You add certain bacteria. So our love is pure. It's like milk. We want to connect with Krishna, his beautiful form, his qualities, his pastimes. That's where our heart is longing. But when we try to push that love through this body, when we try to express it through this body, it becomes mixed and it transforms, like milk transforms into yogurt. We have to recognize the root of the problem is really just the absence of Krishna. We can do all sorts of wild things to try to check this lusty energy in us, right? Some people they torture their own body to try to check the lusty energy. Probably many of the devotees aren't aware of this, but it's actually a big thing right now with men doing all sorts of things to try to like control their sexual energy. They're dipping their genitals in ice water. It's the Wim Hof method. It's all about like dunking yourself in ice water to sort of like shock your body so that your lust goes down. Some men are castrating themselves. In India, there was that famous bling guru, although I think he's been arrested now, as is usually the case for most of these phenomenal popular gurus. He was this bling guru was encouraging his male followers to castrate themselves, and they were doing that. That was their way of trying to deal with the lust. But for most people, the simple solution is misogyny. That's why misogyny is like still so popular. Is that rather than a man kind of dealing with his own inbuilt desire to control and enjoy, just blame women. It's really easy. It's actually really, really easy to do. And then, you just find a bunch of other guys who do that and make a whole club out of it and sort of like force everybody to participate. So that's just another way that men are trying to cope with their bodily concept of life and their lusty desire. But what's being said by Krishna in Bhagavad Gita and in this Srimad Bhagavatam is that there's a hole in our heart and it's shaped like Krishna. And there's no woman or man that's going to fill that. Doesn't mean we shouldn't have relationships. Relationships can also help us to progress towards Krishna. A partnership and enlightenment is real love in this material world. But there is a hole in our heart shaped like Krishna. And the only solution to this problem, sexual attraction and bewilderment, lust to desire, and therefore the only solution to the materialistic mindset is to put Krishna back into our heart. There is no alternative to that. You can beat yourself up for years, you can isolate yourself from women as much as possible. Still, the soul longs to connect with the Lord. That is our nature, to connect with Krishna. We long for the loving reciprocation that only Krishna can provide. But we look for it. We look for some, dare I say, cheap alternative in some mortal of this world. But actually what we all want is Krishna. We all want to connect with God. Nothing's going to substitute that. So the really progressive devotee who recognizes the problem of lusty desire applies the real solution, which is Krishna consciousness, giving the heart fully to Krishna. Now we do that in various ways. Like I said, the 4 ashrams are all about dealing with sexual desires so that we can progress towards Krishna. For most, the Grihastha ashram is very appropriate to have relationship, but for the purpose of progressing towards Krishna. That's what the intelligent person does. That's what Rupa Goswami said, right? In that famous verse, which I should remember. What's that famous verse? Dasya Prema Prabhu, do you remember? Where he says, for so long I've served my master in the form of lust. How does that go? Kamadinam katina katita palita duni desha tesham jatamai na karuna na trapa no pashanti. Utsrijaita mata yarupate. Utsrijaita mata yarupate. Someone help me out. What is that verse? Anyway, he says that for so long, listen to this. This is how Rupa Goswami recognizes the problem of the lust monster and the real solution. He says, for so long, I have served my master in the form of lust. Picture yourself employed by lust personified, this kama, this selfish desire, this sexual desire. whipping you, chained you, forcing you to act. He says, for so long I've served my master in the form of lust. I've rendered such service, and yet my master has not shown any compassion towards me by giving me time off. In fact, the more I serve this master, it seems like the more work there is. Just picture yourself bound, forced into labor by someone. This is what it's like serving this lusty desire, this selfish desire all the time. There's no compassion on the part of this master. There's no relief. There's no benefits, no payment. He says, I haven't even been ashamed to serve this master, nor have I even desired to give it up. I haven't tried to run away from this master. I've served for so long, received no compassion from my master, and I haven't even desired to give it up. He says, but now my intelligence is awakened. Now my intelligence is awakened, and I only seek to serve your lotus feet, O Yadupati, Krishna, the master of the Yadus, the lord of the Yadu dynasty. Utsritaitamata Yadupate Sampratam, love the Buddhis. There we go, love the Buddhis. I've regained my intelligence. Utsrijaitamata Yadupate Sampratam Labda Buddhis Tum Ayata Sharanam Abhayam Mam Niyungshat Madasye. Now I've come to you to take complete shelter at your lotus feet. Please accept me as your servant and protect me. This is the prayer that many of us should be making to Krishna. Recognizing, I put in a lot of time and energy with this whole lust thing. I gave it a good shot, a couple of lifetimes, and it's not working out. Like a breakup is hard. Some of us have had breakups where you have to say to the other person, you know what? This isn't working out. Well, we need to apply that energy to our selfish, lusty desire and say, you know what? This isn't working out. I put in a lot of effort, and it's just not working out between us. Now my intelligence is reawakened, and I see that the real object of my gratification, the real shelter for my desire, are the lotus feet of Krishna. He has accepted me as his servant, and that's my protection. So I'm sorry, Mr. Lust, but we're going to have to go our separate ways. So our intelligence needs to be reawakened. The fact of the matter is that lust covers our intelligence. Avritam gyanametena, gyanina, nityavairina. Twice in Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says that lust is your enemy. Twice. We want to have an enemy. It's part of like the conditioned soul's nature. Everybody needs somebody to love and somebody to hate, as His Holiness Devamrita Swami jokingly would say. And he said jokingly, and when you're married, it's the same person. That's all another subject. You can blame your spouse. You love your spouse. You can also blame your spouse. Bit of tongue-in-cheek humor, but seriously, the conditioned soul, everyone needs somebody to love and somebody to hate. We have this propensity to blame somebody, And a lot of politicians will take advantage of that propensity of yours and make you hate a particular group, for their own political gain. But actually, the real enemy is not that person whose skin color is different from yours, or who speaks a different language, or who's in a different economic status. The real enemy, Krishna says twice in Bhagavad Gita, the real enemy is the lusty desire. It's your selfish desire, it's your sexual desire. He says it covers your consciousness. Avritam jnanam etena. Your jnana, your knowledge becomes covered. You can't see straight. Kamarupena konteya dushparena analena cha, just like a fire, which burns even more when you add more fuel. This kamarupa, this form of lust, it does not leave you alone. It does not go away just by giving it more. If you add more fuel to a fire, the fire doesn't go out, it burns more. So Krishna says, dushparena analena cha. But most importantly is jnana, avritam jnana. We might think, well, what's the big deal? So what? if I objectify the opposite sex? So what if I chase after them, have my way with them? What's the big deal? It's consensual. It's 2023. It's all consensual. As long as it's consensual, it's not a big deal. No, the big deal is that jnanam, avritam jnanam. It covers your knowledge, covers our knowledge. What is that knowledge? Knowledge of Krishna, knowledge of God. It's a huge distraction. And it inspires us towards more materialistic modes of thinking. That's the big problem. I mean, there's also the karmic reaction. You know, anytime you have sexual intercourse with another person's body, there's karma there. Most of our karma is just from interacting with other people, right? Queen Kunti says, Samam charantam sarvatra bhutanam yanmita kali. Krishna is equal to everybody, but the different statuses of living entities is owed to their own interactions. Basically, that's where you get all of your karma. So if you take advantage of someone's body for sexual pleasure, then there's a karmic reaction there. But perhaps even worse than that is that it just covers up your pure consciousness. You cannot be aware of, see Krishna and see all living entities as part of Krishna. Krishna says they are mine. But we're thinking, no, she's mine. It belongs to me. So this is jnanam avritam. This is our knowledge being covered over. There's nothing worse than that. So let us be like Rupa Goswami, who says, now my intelligence is awakened and I'm giving up this ungrateful master, taking shelter of the lotus feet of the Lord, begging him to be his servant, to protect me. Prabhupada says here, once a devotee is fixed in Krishna consciousness, however, these attractions will not agitate his mind. My dear Prabhus, my dear devotees, I don't know for whom this is relevant, but I can say that yes, progress has been made, even in a wild and crazy young man like me. I see how much progress has been made. And the agitation is less and less with each passing day. The attraction towards material energy and material bodies is less and less with each passing day. But most important, the attraction towards Krishna is increasing. So it works. The process works. We chant Hare Krishna, we hear Srimad Bhagavatam, associate with devotees, eat copious amounts of prasadam, and we will be released from the lust monster. Let's apply the real solution, not Band-Aid solutions like misogyny or other weird things. Let's apply the real solution, which is to become a lover of Krishna. Okay, I'm going to stop there. Hopefully I've agitated enough people to warrant some sort of comment or some questions or some thoughts or some feedback. For many, this stuff is obvious. We've heard and thought about these things over and over again, but nityavarnina, lust is always an enemy that we should always be aware of and cautious of. So I hope it's still relevant. Hare Krishna. No thoughts or questions or comments? Then I guess we will.
No. There's got to be comments. People just need a little time to gather their thoughts. I would be shocked if there are no comments on this class.
Hare Krishna.
So,
Dear Taraka Prabhu, do you have some thoughts you'd like to share?
I have so many thoughts. My mind has become cluttered to the extent that I can't organize the thoughts well enough to express them. But I thank you for an interesting, inspiring, and thought-provoking class. I actually had there was one comment you made I agree with. It was I can't trying to find the particular purport to the verses that we covered previously. You were saying that for the motivation of a woman is required. You were saying both material and spiritual life, and as I recall it, what Srila Prabhupada was expressing in that purport, I believe specifically that spiritually that was not required. Material material motivation, that requirement is there, and that he expresses that in a number of places. But I've not heard him express such a
well, then I apologize
spiritual
for my
life.
choice of words. Yes, certainly sexual attraction is not a requirement for spiritual progress. I guess what I meant to say is that for most men, most of us need, a partner. We need partnership. We need to have a woman around. It motivates us for material progress and motivates us spiritually. I can say that I'm motivated by my wife more than anyone. Certainly not a requirement, but I think the Grihastha ashram is most appropriate for most men because most men need that. And that's how they progress. I've seen, of course, firsthand, many men trying to stay in the ashram for as long as possible, but they're not progressing spiritually. All they're doing is thinking about the opposite sex anyway. So yes, thank you for clarifying. Of course, it's not a requirement.
I would say additionally that we often say most men, and because that's what makes sense to us, because that's our own situation, Atmavan Manyate Jagat, so we tend to think that most men have this problem because I have this problem, so probably most men have got this problem. It's not necessary. I don't know, if there's actually been any formal
surveys
taken to find, a survey to determine whether it's actually most men. But I can say for certain that there is absolutely a percentage of individuals for it does not work. There are different types of people, and Srila Prabhupada explains this in what is it, the 8th canto, the story of Gajendra. Talking about fighting from a position of strength and suggesting that, for some people, the household ashram may constitute a position of strength, but that that's not the case for everyone. And therefore there are 4 different ashrams. So the 4 ashrams, which are created by Krishna, the Varnasana ashrams created by Krishna because he knows what's what, and he understands that there are different types of people. And so the household ashram does not work for everybody. It works for some people, and there are others for whom it acts just like poison. So you have to understand your particular nature, how you're constituted, and what will work for you. Not an easy thing to understand. It's good to take help from an authority is qualified to understand such things, or spiritual master in particular. Jai Shri Shri Radha Damodar. I don't know whether we should stop or continue. This is wonderful.
No stopping now.